Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Thanks a lot for joining me on this episode of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. As promised, I have a more comprehensive recap of my 2025 African safari hunt with several podcast listeners for you today. I will talk about that hunt in more detail. I'll provide some reflections on the results of the hunt. I'll tell you a little bit about the Free State, which was the first time I'd ever hunted in that part of South Africa. And of course, I'll talk about how my equipment, especially my new rifles in 25 Creedmoor and 7mm PRC, performed. Just like we did back in 2023, I commissioned a video of this hunt for those who want to see what it was like out there instead of just listening to me talk about it. Now, whenever we video a hunt, Isak from Diversio Productions in South Africa handles that work. He made our 2023 podcast hunt video, and he did this hunt video too. I will release that video next week. I'll share all of the details then. Now, I have put a link to my YouTube channel in the episode description. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you do so and hit the bell so that you receive notifications when I release that video next week. Also, make sure you listen to episode 382 to hear our campfire discussion at the end of this safari. In that episode, you hear from everyone: Dave, Chris, and Steve, who were the listeners who joined me in Africa. You'll also hear from Isak, from Kubis, from Johan, Bertus, Christian, and Philemon. Now, Philemon is our lead tracker. He joined me on the show in episode 383. That is another fantastic interview talking about tracking in Africa. Make sure you listen to it if you have not already done so. Okay, let's get started talking about this hunt. Now, I decided back in 2024 that I wanted to organize another hunt with some podcast listeners in Africa. We had a great trip in 2023, and I wanted to do it again. Now, as you may recall, a hunter named Tim signed up for the 2023 hunt, but couldn't make it. So he was the first guy up for this new 2025 hunt. 3 more guys also signed up to join me on this trip: Dave from Alabama, Steve from Missouri, and Chris from Michigan. Unfortunately, Tim missed out on this hunt again. He could not make the 2023 hunt due to the fact that he started a new job that required lots of new training, a cross-country move, all those sort of things. Well, he suffered a serious medical condition prior to the hunt this year. I'm not going to go into details, but that was, once again, really disappointing, especially for him. I am sure he would have much rather joined us on this trip instead of dealing with that medical problem. But there was no fixing it. And Tim, we're really sorry that we missed you over there, but I am glad that you are recovering well. Now, in addition to Steve, Chris, and Dave, my 9-year-old son, James, also joined me on this trip. He was initially just coming along for the ride, but he decided a couple months prior to the trip he wanted to hunt. I told him that's great, but if you're going to hunt, you're going to do this right, and we are going to ensure you are adequately prepared before we go over there. So we spent a lot of evenings looking at Kevin Robertson's book, The Perfect Shot 2, studying shot placement, and we also spent a lot of time at the range practicing his marksmanship. Now, this is a good time to talk about the equipment I brought on this trip. I brought 2 rifles. The first one was a Horizon Venatic rifle in 25 Creedmoor. Yes, the brand new 25 Creedmoor. It had only been a SAMI standardized cartridge for a couple of months by the time this hunt started. That rifle has a 22-inch long barrel, and I topped it with a Maven RS1 scope. I also brought a brand new Bergara SEMA rifle in 7mm PRC on this hunt. Now, obviously, the 7 PRC is no longer brand new, but the SEMA is, and Bergara only released that rifle a couple of weeks prior to the hunt. They sent me one of the very first rifles they had come off the production line in 7 PRC. I topped it with a Leupold VX5 HD 3-15 by 44mm scope. That is my all-time favorite hunting scope. Now, I was after a mixed bag of plains game on this hunt. I wanted some stuff I had not taken on my previous few trips to Africa. A big bull eland was at the top of the list. So was an Inyala and a Vol Rebuck. I also would have taken some other stuff if the opportunity arose, like a springbok, maybe a common reed buck. I've been on the trail of Diker for a long time, still haven't gotten one. I also can't go to Africa without taking stuff like a blue wildebeest and an impala. There was no buffalo on the menu for me on this trip. So I figured I would use the 25 Creedmoor on stuff like impala and rebuck to see how it would perform. I also planned on having my son James use that rifle to shoot an impala as well. Now, he did great at the range with that rifle. The folks at Horizon know how to make very accurate rifles. That rifle is accurate. It is also very shootable. We started off shooting off the bench for him. Then we transitioned to shooting sitting using sticks, then eventually standing using sticks. I also have a Horizon Venatic in 22 Creedmoor, and that rifle is basically identical to the one I brought on this hunt, except the 25 Creedmoor I brought over is in a different chambering. It also has a 22-inch long barrel instead of 24 inches. But both rifles shoot amazingly well. I went back out to Abilene in December. It was either December or January. I kind of lose track. But several months ago, I went back out to Abilene for a sandhill crane hunt with a couple of podcast listeners. And there was one afternoon after we were done hunting. We were at the shooting range there at the lodge. I brought out the 22 Creedmoor because the guys wanted to check it out. And we took some spent shotgun shells, set them up on a target at 75, 80 yards with the base of the shell facing us, and we all took turns shooting those shotgun shells with the 22 Creedmoor. One guy had to shoot twice to hit it once. Everyone else hit it on the first try. And so I think that was 5 hits with 6 shots with that rifle. So that rifle will flat out shoot. The 25 Creedmoor shoots as well as the 22 Creedmoor. Wonderful accuracy with everything I shot with it. I shot the Hornady Precision Hunter ammo. It worked great. 128 grain ELDX. I shot the Hornady Match ammo, 134 grain ELD Match. That was also awesome. I shot 3 different custom hand loads from Liney Crib with superior ammunition. Those custom hand loads all used a 120 grain North Fork semi-Spitzer bullet. Same bullet in each one, just different loads of powder in each load. Accuracy was virtually identical for all 3 loads. So literally everything I've put in that rifle has shot great. Now, the North Fork Semi-Spitzer is a bonded soft point bullet. It is not a high BC projectile like the ELDX or the ELD Match, but it is much tougher than those projectiles. The load I selected to take to Africa had a muzzle velocity between 2,900 and 2,950 feet per second. I think it was like 2,925 or 2,930. It performed awesome at the range. I was easily dinging steel plates out to 300 yards, almost boringly accurate. As you'll learn here shortly, that load also worked great on animals in Africa. Now, my Bergara SEMA rifle arrived right before I departed. I think I had maybe 2 weeks with it before I flew. I have not shot that rifle extensively, but the couple times I have taken it to the range to do a little bit of work on it for the video I put out prior to the hunt and some accuracy testing and also just, general preparation for the hunt, it worked well right out of the box. It was shooting around MOA accuracy with Hornady Precision Hunter ammo, Nosler Trophy Grade Long Range ammo with the 175 grain Accubon Long Range, and Federal's Terminal Ascent Factory Load with the 170 grain bullet. I got similar performance with Lonnie's custom loads with the 160 grain North Fork Semi-Spitzer, and that is what I opted to take to Africa for the 7PRC since Eland were on the menu. Now, James and I originally planned to fly Qatar Airways through Doha to get there, but I changed my flight after that missile exchange with Iran in June of 2025. All the flights in and out of Doha were canceled for a couple of days, so fortunately I had purchased a fully refundable ticket. I canceled that flight, booked a flight on United via Newark instead. We arrived in Johannesburg the evening of 17 July, stayed the night in a hotel to recover from the trip, like many of our hunters do. Then Christian picked us up the next morning, drove us down to the Free State, and we arrived there and started hunting the afternoon of July 18th. Now, we immediately began spotting game when we were out there. We saw black wildebeest, we saw zebra, and we saw tons of eland, literally tons of eland. That was a herd of perhaps 100 eland, mainly cows and calves, but there was at least one giant bull in that herd. We also saw a separate bachelor herd with several good bulls in it. Now, big bull eland are as big or bigger than a Cape buffalo. Now, the terrain in that area we were hunting was very rugged, very steep. Watch the podcast video and you will see what I mean. So as you can imagine, that steep, rugged terrain combined with the massive size of a big bull eland means that recovery is something you need to plan for before you shoot one of these animals. Shooting a bull elk up in the mountains and recovering it is hard enough. Well, depending on the size of the eland and the size of the elk we're talking about here, a big bull eland can weigh 2 to 3 times as much as a big Rocky Mountain bull elk. So we either need to shoot these eland in a spot where recovery is possible, or you must have plenty of help and time to make this recovery happen after the shot, because that's when the real work begins. Now, unfortunately, even though we were seeing eland, they just weren't in the cards for that first day. They were way too high up the mountain to get to, and especially to recover that day, and it was just too late in the day. No problem, though. It's day one of the hunt. We have plenty of time to make this happen. I also wanted a Vol rebuck on this hunt. Now, the nice thing about Vol rebuck is they are much smaller than eland. They aren't technically part of the Tiny 10, but they are also smaller antelope, and they weigh in the 50 to 60 pound range. Fortunately, Christian happened to spot a very nice volley late in the afternoon on that first day with just enough time to go after him. We saw one ram that looked very nice that had 2 females. They were about 700 yards away from where we were glassing up the side of the mountain. Now, Vol rebuck are not very widespread or common species of game. They only live in very specific parts of southern Africa, and we were fortunate on this property that it happens to have a healthy population of them. Now, like I said, we spotted them late in the day. The sun was going down. Clock was ticking on shooting light we had left out there. So we got our stuff together quickly, started heading up the mountain after them. Now, after we had gone a pretty good distance and we figured we were getting close, we peeked up over a ledge and saw them about 270 yards away. They hadn't moved hardly at all. They were all still right in that same spot, feeding when we started the stalk. I was ready to shoot, but we had a slight crosswind. Christian said he wanted to get a little bit closer. So we got back down, back under that ledge, continued to use that terrain to mask our movements from the rebuck, looped around and got closer, and then peeked up over the ledge again. Saw this time they were about 200 yards away. And fortunately, the wind had died down while we were edging a little bit closer. So the setup was perfect. We decided to shoot here. I got set up on my Spartan Ascent tripod in a sitting position. I wanted to get down into the prone, but the grass was too tall. No problem. Got set up sitting using that tripod. That Vol rebuck was slightly quartering away from me with his right side exposed. I had that Horizon rifle and .25 Creedmoor with me, tucked the crosshairs in just behind his right shoulder, squeezed the trigger. Perfect shot. That bullet hit the rear of the lungs on the right side, exited out the left shoulder. He did not go far at all after the shot. That was a great start to the hunt. Plus, we also saw a beautiful sunset as we were coming down the mountain with that rebuck that evening. Now, Steve arrived later that night, and we spent the entire next day, which was July 19th, hunting together. Steve and I went back to that same place the next day. Now, that is a beautiful property up in the mountains. Like I said, eland, black wildebeest, zebra all live there. There's also Vol rebuck. We also saw some mountain rebuck that day. Steve wanted a pretty general plains game hunt for the normal species of antelope, and he was also flexible on exactly what he wanted to pursue. So we made a deal. If we got a crack at an eland that day, I would go after it, but he would take the lead on anything else we got a good shot at. Now, like I mentioned, we spotted a small group of mountain reedbuck on the drive-in. They are similar in size to Vol rebuck and are territorial. We did not think they would move very far, and they are also easier to recover than a wildebeest or an eland. With that in mind, we decided to keep the reedbuck in our back pocket, so to speak. If we encountered a nice wildebeest or zebra in an accessible spot, we would go after it first, then maybe see about the reedbuck later. Now, it just so happened we encountered a herd of black wildebeest down low where we could get to them easily, so Steve made a stalk with Kubis. Things went great on the stalk. Steve made a good shot, and just like that, he had an ancient black wildebeest bull down for his first African animal. Once we got that wildebeest sorted out, we turned our attention to the reed buck. Now, similar to the reed buck the day before, there was one nice ram in the company of two females. They were up feeding earlier when we saw them in the morning, but they had bedded down not far from where we initially saw them by this point in the day. Steve was down to go after a reed buck, so we prepared for a stalk. We were hunting in July, which is winter in South Africa. Plus, the Free State is at a higher elevation than Limpopo province. So it was windy and darn chilly on this hunt, with temperatures hovering around freezing. We were wearing lots of cold weather gear that morning, but it had warmed up by this point in the day, and we all started stripping off that cold weather gear in anticipation of getting sweaty on this long climb up the mountain to get that reed buck. I decided to join Steve on this stalk. So it was Steve, Christian, Philemon, the tracker, Isaac, the video guy, and me going up together. We used a finger of a ridge to hide our movements from the reed buck, and we commenced to climb up the backside of that ridge. Once we got to what we thought was a similar elevation level as the reed buck, we skirted along the edge of the ridge, then peeked out to try and find them. And sure enough, they were right where we left them. They had no idea what was going on. So we skirted along the edge of that ridge and prepared for a shot. They looked at us a couple of times while we did that, but they didn't seem too agitated. We would freeze when they looked at us until they'd look away. Then we'd start moving, doing our best to obscure our movements with rocks and vegetation. And if they looked back at us, we'd stop again and then start moving again when they would look away. Steve managed to get into a prone position about 225 to 250 yards from the reed buck. And like I said, we were at approximately the same elevation, so there wasn't much upward or downward angle on this shot. When he was ready, Philemon whistled to get the ram to stand up and offer a better shot. The ram stood up when he whistled, but he started running. Luckily, he only ran a short distance. He stopped in the open. Steve made a quick adjustment, and he made a good shot, killed that ram. So that was the highlight of the day for me. It was really fun doing that stalk with Steve. It is unusual to do a mountain type hunt like that in South Africa. I've done it plenty of times on stuff like mule deer here in the USA, but that hunt with the mountain reed buck and then my hunt the day previous on the Val rebuck were a first for me in Africa. We all really enjoyed it. So that's another kind of unique thing about this part of the Free State. You can do some hunting in the plains, like we're going to do later in this hunt that I'll tell you about, but you can also do some hunting up in the mountains at higher elevation and that steeper terrain and things like that, like I said, it's just not very common in Africa. Kristen joked that afternoon that we climbed halfway to heaven going up after that reed buck. That was a very steep, rugged, high elevation area in the Drakensberg Mountains. We were right on the border with the country of Lesotho, too. Now, to wrap up that day, Steve ended up killing a Burchell zebra that afternoon. Similar deal to the black wildebeest. We luckily found one where we could recover it without too much trouble. He made a stalk and killed it with a single shot. Now, the interesting thing about this particular area in the Free State is how open it is, especially compared to Limpopo. Spotting game isn't really difficult here, but we were spotting wildebeest and zebra and whatnot 1,500 yards up a mountain in just crazy, craggy cliffs that would be extremely difficult to approach, never mind getting that animal out of there. And even on that little rebuck and reed buck that we shot, that was still a heck of a climb up the side of the mountain. That was especially true with Steve's reed buck. We had probably 500 feet of elevation gain at a pretty steep angle to get up there after him. So that was a area of the hunt that was pretty physically demanding. And fortunately, Steve and I were in good shape and we were able to handle it. And once again, just very different from the more thickly vegetated, flat portions of Limpopo where we do a lot of our other hunting. Now, Steve was using a Seekins Precision Element rifle chambered in 7mm PRC. He brought some Hornady factory loads with 160 grain CX bullets. That's what he used on everything in the Free State. And then he brought some hand loads he made for himself with 160 grain North Fork semi-Spitzer bullets that he used in Limpopo. But we'll talk more about that later. Now, Dave and Chris arrived that evening. And when they got there, the whole gang was assembled. The next day was July 20th, and we split up into a couple of groups that day. Steve went with Dave, Chris went with me. Steve decided to take a backseat to the other guys that day since he had 3 animals down already. Now, Dave also wanted a typical plains game hunt, with kudu topping his list, also wanted wildebeest, impala, the usual sort of things people hunt in Africa. So Steve and Dave went to another place in the Free State where there were some nice kudu. Now, unfortunately, Dave had kind of a slow start to his hunt, and he and Steve saw a lot of game that day, but nothing worth shooting. A lot of cows, a lot of young bulls, things like that. Chris and I hunted hard for eland in the same place I had hunted the first 2 days, but to no avail. Those eland kind of come and go as they please, and while there were piles of eland there on that first day, we just saw a lone cow this day I was out there with Chris. Christian and I made a long stalk way up into the mountains that morning after we spotted a cow, and we were hoping there were some more eland hidden in the trees around that cow eland. We saw her at about 1,200 yards, and so we made a long, looping stalk through some nasty terrain until we crossed a big canyon, and we were about 400 yards away from her. She was still there, but we verified she was alone, so we made that long walk back empty-handed. Now, Chris was mainly after buffalo on this hunt, and we planned on doing that portion of the hunt in Limpopo. But he also wanted a red hartebeest, among some other game. Now, there weren't any hartebeest where we were hunting eland, so we moved to a different place where there were some hartebeest. And there turned out to be piles of red hartebeest at that spot. Same was true for blesbok, same with springbok. We searched most of the afternoon for a hartebeest, found a herd with a couple nice bulls on it. Now, the terrain was different here from where we had hunted earlier for the eland and the reedbuck and whatnot. Wasn't quite as high of an elevation, but it was still pretty rugged. And we were on one ridgeline. We spotted the hartebeest on another ridge parallel to the one we were on about 500 yards away. I went with Chris and Christian on a stalk to get on those hartebeests. We dipped down into the low ground between those 2 ridges. Those ridges were open on top, but very thickly vegetated down lower. That was a really fun stalk. Sometimes we even had to get down on our hands and knees to get through it. Now, we could not see the hartebeest for the entire time we were on the stalk. We saw them right as we left, marked their position. As soon as we dropped down, they were out of sight. We did not see them again until we popped back up on the other side. But there were herds of springbok and blesbok up higher than the hartebeest, and we were afraid they would see us and spook, so we went to great lengths to avoid them. Now, eventually we got to a spot where we had to crawl up and over the ridge to get a shot at the herd. Now, I've actually done this before, as it turns out, and it was also on a red hartebeest on my first hunt in Africa in 2006. Regardless of where you're hunting in the world, it seems like game is more apt to spook when they see a human form in an upright position, but they don't seem to get as agitated by seeing a crawling human. So when I shot my hartebeest in Africa back in 2006, I think I had to crawl like 200 or 300 yards to get within range of those animals. We didn't have to crawl nearly as far on this hunt, but when we reached the lip of that ridge that we had to get up over to get a shot at these hartebeests, I think the 3 of us had to crawl about 50 yards to get into a good shooting position. So we did that, got set up. There was a great bull in this herd. Chris got set up using a bipod, was ready to shoot, but he did not have a clear shot. He could see the bull great, but there was another hartebeest behind it. And it took 15, maybe 20 minutes for him to get a clear shot on that hartebeest because all the animals were up and moving around and feeding and whatnot. And when that one would move, there'd be another one behind it or in front of it, or he would have turned and wasn't offering a good shot. But eventually, he got a clean shot at this animal and hit it at about 200 yards. That was a really fun hunt. Once again, I'm really glad I was there for that. I also wanted a springbok on this hunt. I could have killed one at this point on the hunt, but I had left my rifle. I probably would have used the .25 Creedmoor for this portion of the hunt in the truck when we made that stalk. But oh well, no big deal. Still a great day. Now, Chris was using a Blosser R8 rifle with a .375 Ruger barrel on that hartebeest. He brought another barrel for use on the buffalo. I'll tell you more about that later. Now, the next day was July 21st. This was our last day in the Free State. Unfortunately, The eland vanished from the first property. Like I said, they come and go as they please. So we went to a different place in hopes our luck would change. I worked hard to get on an eland again that day, and I found lots of cows, lots of young bulls, but no mature bulls that morning. Chris and I each took mountain zebra that afternoon. I used the 7 PRC on the zebra. Steve and Dave both came close on kudu, but just couldn't quite close the deal. So like I said, that was our last day in the Free State. We headed out early the next morning, which was the 22nd, for Limpopo. It's about an 8-hour drive between those two areas. Long day of travel, but we arrived in the afternoon with just enough time to get in a quick hunt. We literally arrived with maybe 90 minutes of shooting light remaining. Now, we all had animals down at this point except for Dave. So he threw his stuff together quickly and headed out. Now, we were all still unpacking in camp and getting settled in when the radio call came in that Dave had shot a beautiful kudu. They had encountered a couple of kudu and eland together, feeding in the dry riverbed that runs through the property. That's a flowing river in the rainy season. It's a dry river in July. So they made a stalk on that group of animals, and he got set up on the sticks. I think it was about a 150-yard shot on that kudu. It was steeply quartering to him. He made a good shot. It dropped in its tracks. We all drove out to congratulate him and help him load it up. Steve brought his rifle out, and he stayed out to hunt that evening until dark. Well, it just so happened that he bumped into a Gemsbok that evening with just a few minutes of shooting light left, and he took what the bush offered him. So that was a very short but productive evening of hunting with a Gemsbok for Steve and a kudu for Dave. Now, Dave was using a Browning X-Bolt in 300 Winchester Short Magnum, shooting hand loads with 200 grain North Fork semi-Spitzer bullets. That kudu instantly dropped at the shot. Now, he recovered that bullet after it punched through a vertebrae in the neck and the shoulder blade of the animal. Now, Steve shot that Gemsbok with 160 grain CX from the 7 PRC. He made a good shot through the vitals. It ran a short distance. He shot it again as a finisher. He recovered a bullet from the Gemsbok. We're pretty sure that first shot exited, and he recovered shot number 2. And Steve switched over to using those hand loads with the 160 grain North Forks after that. Now, 23 July was the next day. That was our first full day in Limpopo. That was a busy, busy day of hunting. Everybody split up and went their own separate ways this morning. I headed out in search of Inyala. We walked for a couple of hours, saw a beautiful sable, but no Inyala. We stopped for a short break at one point, and a herd of impala stepped out in front of us. Now, impala weren't on the menu initially, but I decided to take what the bush offered. I got on the sticks. I shot a nice ram with my Bergara Sema in 7 PRC. That was about a 200-yard shot. He went straight down after the shot. Now, similar to Dave's kudu, that impala was strongly quartering towards me. I hit that impala in the spine near the base of the neck. The bullet obliterated that vertebrae, punched through the chest, exited the ribs, broke the offside shoulder blade, and stuck just beneath the skin. And I recovered that bullet. That was, once again, 160 grain North Fork semi-Spitzer hand-loaded by Superior Ammunition. It held together amazingly well, despite hitting almost as much bone as is possible with a chest shot on an animal that size. Now, Steve also took a Blessbok that day, but the day really belonged to Dave and Chris. Dave had a busy day himself. He ended up taking Gemsbok, Inyala, and Impala. His Gemsbok was really cool, and it had a broken and somewhat unusual horn. He encountered a beautiful Inyala later that day with Burtis. Now, as often happens with Inyala, it was in some thick vegetation, thick with a capital T. They could see it, but it was a tough shot. Burtis let Dave shoot that Inyala with his Heim double rifle in 470 Nitro Express. That was about a 30-yard shot. So that was a fun, unexpected treat. I definitely did not have shooting an Inyala with a double rifle on my bingo card for this hunt, but Dave made it happen that day. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Chris's main goal on this hunt was a buffalo. Johan took him out that afternoon. They happened to encounter a herd with a great bull in it. Now, the buffalo were moving and feeding, but the wind was not good, and the buffalo immediately alerted to their presence. So they backed out, circled around, and managed to get in front of the herd while coming from a different direction this time. The wind was good, and they managed to catch the buffalo moving and ambush the herd without the buffalo knowing they were there. Philemon got Chris set up on the sticks, and he used my Spartan Ascent tripod for this portion of the hunt. Johan ID'd the right bull as it emerged into the open. Philemon whistled to stop it. Chris made a perfect shot straight through the heart of that buffalo. The buffalo staggered, turned, ran a short distance back to where he came from. Now, the buffalo in that herd all milled around in confusion because they had no idea there were any humans around. Heck, that big bull even started attacking some of the younger bulls and cows while he staggered around after the shot. Chris reloaded, and when the bull presented another shot in an open spot and was clear of the other buffalo, he shot again, instantly dropped the bull. But the rest of the buffalo did not leave, and Chris, Johan, Philemon, and Isaac had a Mexican standoff with those buffalo for about another 20 minutes or so before the buffalo finally left. I'm guessing this was probably because the buffalo were confused, never smelled the hunters. And like I said, Isaac was there, filmed the whole thing. That is a really cool part of the podcast hunt video. Now, Chris also brought a .416 Remington barrel for his blaser to use on the buffalo. His first shot on the buff was with a 400 grain North Fork semi-spitzer. Second shot was with a 400 grain North Fork cup point solid. Both were also custom hand-loaded by Lonnie Cribb at Superior Ammunition. We recovered both of those bullets too. Both performed exactly as advertised. Chris's first shot blew a hole a little larger than a golf ball straight through the heart of that buffalo. There is a picture of Chris with the heart of that buffalo in the video. It's pretty impressive. So this is just another amazing testament to the toughness of a Cape buffalo. He had a giant hole blown literally all the way through his heart and was literally dead on his feet, but was still picking fights with the other buffalo in the herd until Chris shot it again. So that was another super busy day, but a great day. Next day was 24 July. I personally decided to focus on getting James his Impala that day. So we sat on a water hole together for most of the day. Game like warthog and zebra came in to drink, but no Impala. We'd been there for 3 to 4 hours, and James said he was ready to leave. I said, let's give it 10 more minutes, and then we'll leave. He said, okay. Well, at about minute 9, I heard a branch snap behind me. I slowly turned and was astonished to see a giant Inyala bull moving through the brush towards us. I had that .25 Creedmoor rifle from Horizon set up on my Spartan Ascent tripod in front of James, and it was oriented towards where I thought the Impala would appear to make it easy for him to take a shot. Well, ever so slowly and carefully, I slid the tripod and the rifle over towards me. Now, just like I'm used to doing while deer hunting here in the USA, I froze every time the Inyala's head was exposed, and then I would move every time it was behind a tree and he couldn't see us. After a short time, I had that rifle and the tripod positioned appropriately in front of me where I could shoot it. Then the Inyala stepped out into the open. I put the crosshairs on its shoulder, squeezed the trigger. That Inyala dug in his front legs, sprang forward, and unsteadily ran in front of us, and then just disappeared into the bush. I heard a crash a few seconds later, which I hoped was him falling over just inside the tree line. I reloaded, gave him a couple minutes, followed his trail into the woods, and sure enough, he collapsed right where I heard the crash. He went maybe 50 yards from where I shot him. So that was an unexpected treat that day, and I was pleasantly surprised at how well the .25 Creedmoor performed. Now, while all this was going on that afternoon, the rest of the guys were all hunting separately from us. Chris took a nice blessbuck, Steve took an Impala and a kudu. Isaac was with Steve for both of those animals, got him on video. There's a really cool story for both. I will let you see for yourself in the podcast video. Now, that evening, after it got dark, Burtis took Steve and Dave out jackal hunting. He was using an electronic call with a thermal monocular to spot game, and he had a Mauser M18 rifle in 6.5 Swede with a thermal scope on it to hunt. And they had a great evening out there. Dave shot a jackal. That was a really nice treat. Now, the next day was 25 July, and the weather changed this day. It was a very slow day with not a lot of animal activity. I did have a fun stalk on a wildebeest that evening. Found a nice bull, and Philemon tracked him for several miles over the course of a couple of hours. We bumped a herd of zebra that was in there too that we didn't initially know about. They spooked, which in turn spooked the wildebeest, and they all blew out of there right before it got too dark to shoot. This hunt That part of the hunt with Philemon was one of the specific instances of his tracking that I referred to in episode 382. He acted like he was just on a casual walk out in the woods, but we were literally right on that wildebeest trail the entire time over the course of 2 to 3 miles of walking that evening. Incidentally, this was the first day on the trip that nobody shot anything. Now, the next day was 26 July, and the weather changed again that day, but game activity picked back up. Everything was moving again. I went out again in search of a blue wildebeest with Philemon and Kubis first thing in the morning. We encountered a herd of wildebeest, made a stalk, but didn't have a clear shot, and the wildebeest moved off into the thick stuff. We followed with Philemon tracking. We encountered them again, maybe a mile later at about 30 yards, but the vegetation was so thick I did not have a clear shot. The wildebeest blew out again, but we continued to follow. We encountered that herd again about an hour and about a mile later in the bush. And once again, they were at almost knife fighting range. The wind was good this time, though. We were on a narrow game trail in the bush, and Philemon peeked out around a corner, looked down the trail, froze, set up the sticks very slowly and quietly, and then slowly moved off to the side to make space for me. I slid up, put my rifle on the sticks, looked through the scope. I could see 4 to 5 wildebeest out in front of us really close, like 20 to 40 yards in front of us. Philemon pointed me towards a big cow they wanted me to cull, which was fortunately offering a clear shot. She was quartering towards me. I put the crosshair just inside her left shoulder and squeezed the trigger. I was using a Trigger Cam 2.1 on this hunt. That is a scope camera that you mount over your scope and then it videos what you see through the scope. I've had that for about 2 years. It has worked great, but unfortunately started to go on the fritz on this hunt. But it did fortunately manage to capture literally the instant of this shot on video. I got 1 second of usable video out of that clip I was filming, but it was literally the 1 second that was the most important. I was using that Bergara Sema in 7PRC again, and the results of that 160 grain North Fork on that wildebeest were impressive. She staggered forward a few steps, fell down, got up, took a couple steps backwards, then fell down again for good. And she barely left my scope view through that whole time. And once again, that is on the podcast hunt video, so check it out. That was a really fun stalk. We were on the trail of those wildebeest for about 2.5 hours, and we covered several miles in the process. I took a close range shot through a narrow window in the bush. Isak was literally right behind me with his camera, almost touching me at the time, but it was so thick he could not clearly see what was going on when I shot. Now that is a good reminder to make sure the magnification on your scope is turned down. I had no problems finding that wildebeest in my scope at 3 power, but that would have been a big issue at 10 or 15 power. And this is another example of Philemon's excellent tracking that I referred to in the previous episode. This was the second to last day of our hunt. I had everything I really wanted. At this point, I had resolved to come back for yet another go at Eland in the future, but everybody else still had stuff they were looking for. James needed an impala, Steve was after an Inyala or a waterbuck, Dave and Chris both wanted blue wildebeest. Now, Steve came close on Inyala and waterbuck a couple times over the course of the hunt, but just couldn't quite seal the deal. He encountered a herd of golden wildebeest while heading back to camp for lunch, though, that day, and they piqued his interest. So he and Christian turned their focus to getting him a golden wildebeest. They actually made a stalk out of camp on foot that afternoon, found that small group of golden wildebeest they saw earlier in the day. Similar to what I encountered with my wildebeest, they were in some thick stuff, and he had multiple occasions where they could see a part of the bull but didn't have a clear shot. They had to move a couple of times, but Steve finally got a clear shot on that bull, and he ended his hunt with a beautiful golden wildebeest bull that day. I turned my attention towards getting James his impala at this point. Since we had struggled at the waterhole over the past couple days, we decided to take a more mobile approach with Philemon. Now, before we did that, I took James to the range, did some last-minute practice with him shooting standing off sticks. We started at 45 yards. He dry-fired a couple times, felt good, so I told him to load the rifle, fire at one of the steel plates. Boom, perfect shot. We backed up to 55 yards. Boom, perfect shot. We backed up to 65 yards. Boom, perfect shot. I said to him, James, you've got this. You're not going to get a shot much past 65 yards. The way things are going on this hunt with how thick it is out here, just do exactly what you did 3 times in a row right now. You're going to kill an impala this afternoon. So James and I got in the back of one of the trucks. Philemon drove us around in search of impala. It did not take long to find a big herd. Gosh, there must have been 50 to 75 animals in this herd. They ran across the road in front of us, and a few stuck around, milling around in the bush on the left-hand side of the road. We all dismounted the truck, made a short stalk. Philemon set up the sticks for James. It was so thick I could see the impala legs, but their bodies were for the most part obscured by the brush. But there was one narrow window through the bush that offered a clear shot. An impala stepped into it and paused while Philemon asked James to shoot. He was looking through the scope, said he saw another impala behind that one, so I told him to wait. Both impala moved off, but another ram stepped into that opening a couple seconds later. I told James to shoot if he felt good. He squeezed the trigger. We all heard a loud slap from the woods in front of us. All the impala abruptly disappeared. Philemon led the way into the bush, and if anything, it was thicker than I initially thought. That narrow window James shot through was a game trail, but even on that trail, it was so thick and nasty and thorny that the 3 of us had to crawl on our hands and knees to go down it. Philemon quickly brought us to the spot where the impala was standing, and there was blood everywhere on the ground. He rose up a bit on his knees, looked off to his right in the brush, and then uttered some of the happiest words I've ever heard. There's the impala right there. It went maybe 5 to 6 yards after the shot. That impala was standing quartering towards us at about 50 yards when James shot it. He placed the bullet perfectly on the X on the point of his shoulder, and he was using that 120 grain North Fork semi-spitzer bonded soft point. It broke the right front shoulder, destroyed the right lung, annihilated the heart, hit the left lung, and then exited out the ribs on the other side. Terminal performance was devastating. There were lots of great parts of the hunt for me. That was my favorite part of the hunt, though. And James is going to have an impala shoulder mount in his room when we get our taxidermy back home. Now, we shot that impala the afternoon of the 26th, so we went into the 27th with Dave and Chris still needing wildebeest. I went out with Dave that morning. We had several stalks on wildebeest, but they gave us the slip each time. But the animals were moving a lot this day. I was confident it would all work out for him. Now, sure enough, Chris got his wildebeest later in the day, and then the entire focus of the hunt turned to getting Dave his wildebeest that afternoon and that evening. Now, to this point, I had shot everything using North Fork bullets myself, both for the 25 Creedmoor and the 7 PRC. So I decided to take a flyer to see if I could get an impala with an ELDX from the 25 Creedmoor later that day. Well, it just so happened that a ram offered me a shot at about 75 to 80 yards that evening. Similar to James's impala, this one was quartering towards me when I shot it. The impala staggered when I hit it, but it darted into the thick stuff immediately after the shot. Turned out I hit exactly where I was aiming, but the bullet deflected slightly to the rear going through the impala's ribcage. That bullet destroyed the near lung. Damage to it was horrific, and it caused significant damage to the liver, but stopped in the impala's stomach, did not exit. That impala only went 50 to 60 yards after the shot, but it ran into some thick brush. We did eventually find it, but it took much longer than we initially thought it would, and we did not find a single drop of blood in the process. I did recover the bullet. It worked. It killed the impala, but it delivered very different performance from the North Forks. And basically the only part that I recovered was the jacket. All the lead had been stripped out of the core. To be fair, I was using that ELDX outside of its ideal use case and outside of what it is specifically designed for by shooting an impala at relatively close range like that. But this is also the only available factory load for the 25 Creedmoor marketed for hunting game right now too. I would probably have obtained very different results at 200 to 300 yards or farther with that bullet, but that's not the sort of terminal performance I like to see under those conditions. That 120 grain North Fork semi-spitzer, clearly superior for close range shots like we were encountering in Limpopo. I did not recover a single one of those 25 cal North Forks on this hunt. They performed awesome in the bushveld, even in the rebuck in the Free State at 200 yards. They delivered deep penetration, massive wounds, short tracking jobs. Even on the Inyala, they worked great, and that Inyala is a lot bigger than those Impala we were shooting. In any case, back to the hunt. While all this was going on with me, Dave's luck was finally changing on the other side of the property. They spotted a big blue wildebeest bull, and he made a perfect shot after a nice stalk to wrap things up with just a little bit of light left on the last evening of our hunt. That was a happy and satisfied group of hunters that went to bed that night. I had a lot of fun when I hunted Africa with Mike and Fernando in 2023, but I thought this was an even better hunt. All told, the 5 of us put a buffalo, 2 kudu, 2 Inyala, 2 blesbok, 5 Impala, 3 blue wildebeest, 1 golden wildebeest, 1 black wildebeest, 1 red hartebeest, 2 gemsbok, 2 mountain zebra, 1 plain zebra, 1 mountain reedbuck, 1 Vol reedbuck, and 1 jackal in the skinning shed on that hunt. That was all great, but there's a whole lot more to the hunt than just killing a lot of animals, though. Most importantly, Steve, Chris, Dave, James, and I had a great time. It was an honor and a privilege to join them all on their first African hunting safari. I remember how special that experience was for me when I went on my first safari 19 years ago. I went on that hunt with my dad. Words cannot describe how special it was for the shoe to be on the other foot for James's first hunt in Africa for me. Indeed, this was the actual first hunt where he was the actual hunter and not just joining me. Now, there were both highs and lows on this hunt. I was disappointed I did not get my eland. It wasn't for lack of trying. It also wasn't for a lack of eland either. We had another hunter take a monster bull eland in the Free State the month before I arrived, and literally the next hunter that went to Limpopo after we got home from this trip took a great bull there. Oh well, that just means I need to go back. I have 2 of Southern Africa's spiral-horned antelope now with a kudu and the Inyala I took on this trip. I will eventually get that eland. I will also eventually get a bushbuck to go along with it. A common diker is also still eluding me. I'd also like a nicer springbok than what I got on my first hunt. I'd also like a klipspringer and maybe a common reedbuck and maybe some other things too. Now, it's funny that no matter how long a trip over there is, it is never long enough. The days are always busy. There's always stuff left to do no matter how hard I hunt. This was an especially busy trip because I wanted to do my own hunting and also spend time with Chris and Dave and Steve and also hunt with James. And I intentionally put some of the things I wanted to do on the back burner to cater to each of them at different parts of the hunt. And I also made sure to set some time aside to just enjoy being in Africa, to smell the roses, so to speak. For instance, I saw a baby giraffe that was about 1 month old on this hunt. I'm glad I did that, even though that means I didn't do quite as much hunting as I would have if I would have been there myself. No matter how many times I go over, it always seems like I have a new experience, and that quote-unquote little giraffe that was still about 6 to 7 feet tall was one of those things on this hunt. And gosh, seeing a sunset in Africa is still one of the most incredible sights that I have yet to match anywhere else in the world. I will return to Africa. I'm just not quite sure when. I'm probably not going in 2026. We'll see about maybe 27 or 28. Maybe I'll go with a friend. Maybe I'll do another podcast hunt where I come over with a couple of listeners. Shoot me an email at john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com if you would like to join me on a hunt in Africa in the future. Also, when you do that, let me know what you might be interested in hunting. No promises, though. Now, you don't have to wait for me to make up my mind about a podcast safari to hunt Africa, though. Like I've said many times, there is no guarantee you will have the time, the money, or physical ability to hunt if you put things off for a year or two. I've seen it happen to people far too many times to count, where they want to do this hunt, they delay it, then something prevents them from ever doing that hunt. Steve, Chris, and Dave all had awesome hunts that far exceeded their expectations on this hunt this year. The same was also true for Fernando and Mike in 2023. As I record this, I am fully booked for hunts in Africa in 2025, but I still have some openings for 2026. I will also open bookings for 2027 in earnest at the end of this year, too. I won't be there to hunt with you, but you'll be hunting with Kubis, Christian, and or Johan in the exact same areas where Steve, Dave, Chris, and I all hunted. And even though I won't be there in person, I will be available to you to help answer questions, sort out logistics, and just do everything possible to ensure your mind is at ease and that you have a safe and fun trip. You can hunt plains game, you can hunt buffalo, you can hunt both if you'd like. The Free State is a great place to visit if you've already done a typical plains game safari somewhere else in Africa for the usual suspects like kudu, wildebeest, and impala. And like I said, there is outstanding hunting for stuff like black wildebeest, red hartebeest, and springbok in the Free State, animals like that really prefer those grassland habitats that don't do so well in Limpopo. The same is also true for stuff like common reedbuck, mountain reedbuck, and Val reedbuck. Valleys, as they are known, aren't very widespread in Africa. That place I shot mine on has some awesome hunting for them. Same with the mountain reedbuck. And gosh, the hunting for them isn't easy, but that is also a great place to go for a humongous eland. And if you put in the time there, the eland will likely eventually cooperate, and you have good odds of coming home with a really big bull eland. Email me, John, at thebiggamehuntingblog.com, or visit bestSafariHunt.com to learn a little bit more about our hunts. Make sure you tell me you are a podcast listener when you contact me. I will give you a special bonus. Putting aside Africa for a minute, do you have any interest in a big game podcast hunt in the USA? I haven't firmed up details yet, but I am thinking of doing something like a 4 to 5 day hunt for deer or antelope out west somewhere. But it would be a similar concept to the podcast Africa Hunt. We'd have several listeners in camp, everyone staying in the same lodge, hunting in the same general area, etc. Let me know if that is something you would like to participate in. I am considering putting something together along these lines for 2026. This is why I'm probably not returning to Africa next year. But more details will eventually come out about this if it's something that I decide to do and I get enough interest in. And finally, remember, I am releasing the podcast hunt video next week. I've put a link to my YouTube channel in the episode description. Subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you learn exactly when I release that video. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and I can help. Thanks for listening. I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.